In my last video, I mentioned the possibility of finding a cheap digital audio player that mimics the sound qualities of a tube DAC or tube amp. And yes, there is something that exists. In fact, probably variations of this one thing that you can find for very cheap, especially in comparison to the products that are supposed to be specially designed for tube digital audio playing. The device that I was referring to is this. It is the Flang P5. Now, Flang P5 is an interesting device. I got this, I think 5 or 6 years ago, something like that, off of eBay for about $50. And back then I was just experimenting with digital audio players and trying to figure out what is the cheapest I could get and yet still have all the functionality I would ever want. I stumbled across this and realized I hated this device from the get-go. I hate the aesthetics. I really do not like the menu structure, even though it's very simple and quite linear. And I detest the buttons on this device. There are too many redundant buttons on this, half of which don't work very well. For example, the side buttons will change every time I restart the device. So when I think that one of these buttons is going to do one thing, on restart, it'll do something completely different. And there's nothing in the menus I can do to make sure that that doesn't happen. Besides the point, this device does in fact sound like a tube amp or tube DAC. And it doesn't have any tubes in here. The reason this device, the Flang, sounds like a tube amp or DAC is because of the faulty components in it. Whenever I plug in my IEMs, my headphones, I can immediately hear hiss, audible hiss, and I can hear some sort of buzzing in the background. It's not like electricity, it doesn't really sound like that, but it does sound like faulty headphone output componentry. And when I play music, it just synthesizes into a warm, kind of glowy sound signature. And I know this is very, very subjective, which is, again, okay when we're describing sound because there's no real way to describe objectively sound that you're hearing. Same thing with what you're smelling. You can't really objectively demonstrate. You can only tell people what your impressions are. So my impression of this is that it has that tubey effect. And frankly, I would know since I've handled many tube amps and tube DACs. In fact, one of my favorite things to do is find tube DACs, which are very, very rare indeed. I've mentioned this several times, that the benefit of having a tube in the process, let's say from source to output, is that the tubes will in fact color the sound that you're getting. This is different from what a DAC does. A DAC's only job is to convert digital zeros and ones to an analog output. And it does that very well, very clearly. There used to be times way back when components were not reliable, companies were not implementing good DAC chipsets, and so there were faults or variations among them. But all modern DAC chipsets are designed within very strict guidelines. And so the major brands like AKM, ESS, Cirrus Logic, and some others do have strict testing parameters to make sure every single DAC chipset that gets shipped out, no matter what generation, falls within a specific type of criteria. Low harmonic distortion, well below the human audible hearing range, and the ability to render clean, clear digital to analog conversion. And so when you have a DAC that's been designed and it has not been altered by a subsequent manufacturer, say Topping or SMSL or VIO, to actually change how it converts digital to audio, then that conversion process in that chipset is linear. It is flat, just like it was designed by the original manufacturer. The output stage, the headphone output, the line out output of a DAC or an amplifier, well, if you use faulty components, then those could in fact somehow color the sound that you're hearing. But that's not a design, that's a fault in the circuitry, that's a fault in the design process. If companies want to use faulty components, or they want to introduce distortion, or they want some hiss or noise in the signal, because they believe that that will sonically affect what you hear. They can certainly do that, but they should be required to tell us that they're doing that. At least give us some idea of what their implementation is, and don't leave it up to the imagination. I say all of this because this is really what the P5 does. This is not a device I would ever recommend to anybody who wants a clean, clear, good, flat, neutral sound signature. It just doesn't provide that. Not because the DAC chipset in here is a bad one, and I think this is it's not an AKM, it's not an ESS, it's not a Cirrus Logic, it's a Burr Brown as far as I can remember, but I can't find any material on this. I do remember buying this with the intention of getting a Burr Brown chipset, which are good, very good. Ancient, no longer in existence. Regardless, I would not recommend this device to anybody who wants clean linear output because of the components. The headphone output is not good at all. But if you like that sort of sound output, this device can do it. Question though, if this is intended to be clean and clear and really doesn't perform that way, and then objectively or subjectively, whichever way you want to look at it, provides a less than honest rendition of the sound, what do? Can we find a device that does tubey goodness, designed specifically for tubey goodness? Yes, of course. We already mentioned DACs and amps that use tubes, but there are also some digital audio players that use tubes. For example, this is the Canon N3 Pro. I got this several years ago, shortly after it was released. This is a device that runs off of Android. It's exceptionally well built, like almost all of Canon's devices. It has full support for DSD, PCM, and touchscreen. It also has the ability to switch from solid-state circuitry to tube implementation. And the way they do that is that you swipe down, and now the tube is going to get warmed up and start adding a little bit of harmonic distortion into your headphone or line output. Line output, not line output. You know what I mean. Now, if you can see just a little bit, you should be able to tell that there is some glow right there. That is the tube. The tubes they're using in this device are called nano tubes, meaning small tube. And that's basically what it is. It's a singular small tube inside this device. There are other devices also built for tubular goodness. For example, like this, the hifi 1969. I got this several years ago. It's a good device. It's also a digital audio player. It's not as intuitive to use as this, but it's not nearly as bad to use as this. So you could say it's kind of a middle ground. It has two screens, the one tiny one here, and then you have one here that can be activated. Eventually, it can be activated. There we go. It can be activated on the side. I don't know if you can see that. But there is a little screen here which provides a little bit of information, your frequencies. It's a frequency analyzer in there. In any event, this device actually does have tubes in here too. It has two tubes in here. These tubes are larger than the tubes in the N3 Pro. So this adds more harmonic distortion, audible harmonic distortion, than the N3 Pro does. These two, in comparison to the Flang, offer something objectively and I would say subjectively different from the Flang. The sound signature from these two is in fact a little bit clearer than this. This device adds that characteristic hiss and noise that I mentioned earlier, while these two devices, even though they are tube implemented, don't have that hiss or noise in the headphone output. Instead, the harmonic distortion that you tend to hear with these two devices, assuming you have an IEM or headphone that's sensitive enough to pick that up and also transmit it to your ears, is well, better, to put it in the simplest terms. The headphone output components in these two devices are very clean, and while there is doubtless some amount of noise inherent in those outputs, they are well below the auditory level for humans. Whereas on this, it's just a piece of junk. So, if you wanted to find a device that had the to-be goodness, you could. But you would have to steer towards a device that has faults in it. And there's no really any way for you to know whether the device, a cheap one, that you're going to buy will have those characteristic faults. And I will make a point with this. I purchased this little doohickey a couple of days ago from Amazon. It was $18. And I figured that's the lowest price I could find for a digital audio player. So let's just order it and see. Maybe if I go really bottom barrel, I will get what I got from this device. Sadly, that's not the case. Even though this device is perfectly good in what it offers, it's a tiny $18 touch screen Bluetooth PCM radio operable exit FM radio. Yes, please exit FM radio. You can play videos on here too. Anyway, this device for 18 bucks allows me to listen to music, no problem. And it also has a speaker output in case you really want to torture your ears. This, however, does not sound like this. Sadly, or not sadly, depending on your perspective, the headphone output on this is fairly silent. I can't really hear anything that's problematic. No hiss, no other distortion or noise that I could pick up. It's fairly silent, like I said. Not so much on the Flang. So, when you're out looking for a digital audio player that has to-be goodness, you can either go for dedicated products like the Hi-Fi 1969 or the N3 Pro, which costs a lot of money, anywhere between $600 and $800, depending on where you find it and if you can find it. Or you can go for super cheap, hoping that the super cheap option really does have really bad componentry that will add the harmonic distortion that we're looking for. So, if you're in the market and you want to experiment and you don't want to go down the normal route of purchasing these expensive devices, I think going this direction with something like the Flang P5 might be a worthwhile option with many, many caveats. For example, the menu structure isn't the best. The knobs and doohickeys are redundant and also not the best. The battery life is okay. The aesthetics are awful. And by the way, trying to find the cheapest device you can with the hopes that you're going to get the harmonic distortion or tubiness from something like this, an $18 device from Amazon, it's hit or miss. And on this occasion, I missed. Maybe if I keep buying things like this, I'll stumble across another one that sounds something like the Flang. But that's a lot of effort and a lot of money and quite frankly, throwaway products. And I don't really want to go down that direction if I can avoid it. So, there you go. Look for a device like the Flang P5 if you want an experiment. If you want a true tube implemented digital audio player, you have a couple of options, although this one I think is off the market. The N3 Pro is still available from place to place, depending on where you live. So, if you want to add coloration to your sound, especially on the go, either get something dedicated, get something really faulty, or simply just live with solid state and use EQ.